Are we part of a status quo or are we transforming a system? I want there to be underpinning systems so that we can have a unified architecture that drives private placement of capital and resolves the liquidity challenge for social entrepreneurs.
Welcome everyone to Impact Investing Musings, a podcast series where we delve into the ever-evolving world of impact investing and aim to connect, educate, and share knowledge to drive capital towards impact. I'm Vikas Arora, Chief of Impact Investing at AVPN.
And I'm Jackie, your host. In this episode, we hear from Audrey Selian, a pioneer in the impact investing sector who has been managing Rianta Capital's impact investment portfolio since 2006. She serves as a trustee and advisor for several nonprofits and funds. Together, we explore how funders can harness new tools and technologies to alleviate some of the challenges around due diligence and more. Let's dive in.
Thank you so much, Audrey. It's lovely to connect. How about you introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Jackie. My name is Audrey Selian, and I'm with Artha Impact at Rianta Capital, an impact investor working in India since 2008.
Amazing. I think you've got a really interesting story. How did you first set up the organization?
It was actually an initiative that was born inside the context of a single family office, which is Rianta Capital. And it was really the brainchild of Tom Singh, the kind of principal. He was thinking at that time about what he could do with, wealth management and capital that really transcended philanthropy, something that would focus on the longer term experience of entrepreneurs. I mean, I don't think it was at the time when we had the language of impact investing already coined, but it was definitely this instinct to think about injecting capital where sustainability, financial and operational, could follow 3, 5, 6, 7 years later.
Starting from an impact investing lens, how did the platform emerge?
Yes, I think it came from the realization upon the first major conference that I attended that there are many, many other actors positioned just like Artha Impact. And so in order for us to be able to act in concert as an ecosystem of like-minded players, we need tools. We must have multi-sided networks with different actors and stakeholders profiled so that we can start to solve the problems of visibility and asymmetry of information. And there it began, with the idea of, okay, let's just, the things we see, and that's a drop in the bucket. Why don't we put them someplace? And let's ask others who we know now, thanks to the conferences and convenings and networks like AVPN, let's ask others to put what they see, again, in the same place, so that we can at least signal when deeper homework has been done, when the effort and time has been taken to have a closer look, to have dialogue, to build trust. I think that, even those elements just, covered and captured so that we have signaling happening.
Maybe we need to describe this platform. For people that are less familiar, how would you describe what the platform is and what it does for, let's say, a more traditional impact investor that is perhaps not yet connected into that ecosystem that you're talking about?
The platform, very simply, is a multi-sided platform that profiles all kinds of enterprises, direct opportunities, funds. It's entirely agnostic regarding whether one needs to raise debt, equity, or grant, or anything in between. So the opportunity enterprise side is one profile. The other profile is the investor or funder. Then we also have profiles for what we call ESOs, the common language of our sector, for enterprise support organizations. This is a profile for incubators, accelerators, universities, any space that is working on the cultivation of pipeline, of opportunities that work with companies. And then the fourth profile type is the third-party service provider, technical assistance, legal services, due diligence services, capacity support. When due diligence is signaled and when somebody requires help with due diligence, on the system, you can actually launch a mini RFP, a little mini request for proposals. These third parties receive a signal saying, okay, Artha Impact, Rianta Capital, requires help on due diligence with, a rural business located in Assam, outside of Barpeta. Who can help? It's just discovering what's in the pipeline, signaling and watching things, and then managing that process of due diligence. one can signal their commitments to a particular enterprise or a fund. Again, those are just signals, it's non binding. And it's a way for people to be able to signal when they can actually call on to others to come with them, to co invest, to collaborate. For us, it's a place where the mechanics of collaboration can actually be realized.
There's so much difference when we talk about different sectors, different geographies. When you talk about impact, like the definition of impact changes everywhere you go around the world, and the nuance is so diverse. How do you, as a platform, kind of navigate these nuances and be able to bring collaboration when every sector is so different and every geography is so different as well?
That's a great question, Jackie, and I'm very glad you asked it because it mirrors, I think, the core learning that we've had over the many years since we just launched the Artha India system. Large, federated, centralized systems that purport to serve all the nuance that you're speaking to in terms of issue based, place based, SDG based objectives have tended not to work. And I think that's been the primary reason why we've driven to a more SaaS structured, customizable, white label approach. So when you license the system, you wrap it in your banner and your colors in your issue, in your place, in your geography, however you'd like to frame it. There is a version called Baraka, and Baraka is focused on emerging market health. There's another version called Opt Impact. That's all about Philadelphia. It is all about the city of Philadelphia, all the absorptive capacity of the entrepreneurial innovators in that city, and all the funders and families and major funding entities in that city. There's another version in France, and that's just catered to French family offices. And the good investors work with their steward families using the same architecture. So we have instances and pockets of completely white labeled versions of the system, and we're finding that that tends to work better.
I can foresee this would be fantastic for kind of follow on funding for investors that have already perhaps got a portfolio and they want to be able to connect with other investors. Maybe you could just share what are a couple of the use cases you've seen where this has really helped to increase the impact or mobilize more capital for some of the users.
It's really difficult to, set up platforms and then have, greenfield opportunities that are not attached to any particular trusted entities being listed somewhere because there's no context around those. And so one of the discussions has been, well, perhaps the focus should be entirely on the existing portfolio of those funders who would want to come together and start to work with one another. So that is absolutely one of the key findings that we've kind of landed on over the years.
One thing, maybe to help bring it to life, is for people that are not on these systems, in traditional due diligence for impact investors, what are some of those barriers that they face?
First and foremost, the challenge is having the just the physical, the face time, the level and depth of interaction that you must have with an entrepreneur, the founder or co-founder team that you meet, and then the rest of the management team that hopefully is there to support them. You have to be able to go to a certain level of depth. They will send you their pitch deck, their business plan, their financial model, and all the materials. Then you have to digest that. And if you're doing it on your own as a transaction, let's say you're the transaction lead, well, you have to digest that information and synthesize it into something that you would eventually have resembling some sort of I imagine, a memorandum or a report that you must submit to your investment committees, or in our case, our trustees. As soon as other investors are in the mix, that interaction becomes more complicated and a little bit heavier because other investors may be having a series of their own questions to be asking. That may also create, you know, limited bandwidth. It may create stress. It may create just a lack of coordination, as well as obviously the issue of competitive dynamics. I mean, it's not always evident that another investor coming in is going to be your co investor. You don't know who they are. And so sometimes, with many competing investors looking at the same company, all we're doing in these exercises is driving up the price of the company, which may or may not lead to anything, especially when you're new into a market and you're not necessarily seasoned. We've seen diligence sometimes drag as long as 6 months. And if there's many people at the table and the entrepreneur is putting hopes on having multiple streams of revenue come in, managing that information flow is challenging. Now, the field level and the actual real life interaction itself is also difficult. And typically when one's looking at an SME, that's a social enterprise serving underserved communities, these businesses will typically, in their early stages, won't will not be raising more than $1 million. Now, as we all know, the due diligence that, is undertaken on $1 million project is essentially the same due diligence that's undertaken on a $10 million project. The costs of it are relatively challenging. And if you have the tendency, as we do in our sector, impact investors tend to fancy themselves as kind of on the forefront of certain development narratives, and we're going to go and we're going to solve X and Y problem. What that leads to is obviously a desire and an imperative to be in the field. Now, if you're based in that country and you're going to the rural parts of your own country, that's one thing. But the impact investing community is far flung. It's extremely widespread. And when you're sitting in cities like Boston or Zurich or Frankfurt, it is quite expensive when all of us decide to do the same due diligence field trip. So, being able to undertake processes that are swift, efficient, collaborative, and effectively able to engage local resources, I think are really critical to having a good outcome.
Thank you so much for sharing that about the perspective from the founders. I think sometimes impact investing community, there's a bit of a disconnect between the funder and the entrepreneur. And sometimes they don't realize how much pressure they're putting on the founders to deliver all of these documents for due diligence. And as you mentioned, sometimes there's three or four, or sometimes even five different investors or grant makers or funders that they need to engage with. And it can be very overwhelming for the entrepreneurs. And sometimes they'll spend, as you mentioned, 6 months preparing a lot of paperwork where everyone, I think, is aligned that they want them to be focusing on the impact, right? You want them to be focusing on the product. You want them to be focusing on their core business. And so that can be a big distraction when they're pulled away from that. And so yes, it's a challenge for the funders. It's also a huge challenge for the entrepreneur. Is that something that you've seen as well? Have you seen this platform kind of alleviate that stress of the founder?
I mean, Artha Impact has been at this for, I don't know, about 18 years now, right, in this one market. And I said this repeatedly in other fora. I cannot believe that it's not easier today for social entrepreneurs coming up with great innovative ideas to more quickly identify and engage with the purveyors of capital, impact capital. Like as and so thank goodness there are networks like AVPN, the Indian Impact Investors Council. Now the at least the directories are there. The mechanisms for getting the actors to be actually like, you know, behaving in concert and sharing, even with just two or three peers. You're not going to share with 100, but you're going to say, "Hey, I know you." But it's not so for everybody, especially if you're new. We have to make that easier. So I think, again, our platform, first and foremost, can help with the discovery piece. The due diligence piece, again, depending on how tightly and effectively the curation of the community and network is happening, I do think there are opportunities to leverage this kind of tech, just to super simple tech, to be able to get us to the point where we make the lives of these entrepreneurs easier, because ultimately they are the ones bearing the disproportionate risk and sacrifice to be able to bring about societal change and transformation. We cannot add more burden to them than they already undertake just by virtue of what they do.
Thank you so much for that and for all of the work that you're doing. What are some of the trends that you've seen? How has the industry evolved? Almost every week, I'm meeting a new impact investor or a new fund that's kind of traditional funds or maybe moving more into the impact space. We've even got big financial institutions exploring impact more seriously. What are some of the bigger trends that you've seen across the industry?
I think that it has worked in some sense. This the rallying cry for trying to propagate the message, the mission, of sustainability and impact, because a lot of traditional funds are integrating basic principles of ESG, or I mean, however they do it. Again, I want to tread carefully around that because it's been so needlessly politicized in certain countries. But I think there is a growing awareness of the need to apply um, specific lenses that actually help us to see new dimensions of value. So I think that's fascinating because when you're actually looking at something in a way that transcends just the financial calculus and you're actually looking at the ripple effects and then looking at trying to see what metrics may capture some of those ripple effects that affect the rejuvenation of a neighborhood, for example, or the jobs that are created thereon as a result. It does change the conversation you're having. It allows you to bring other types of capital to the table. And ultimately, it does affect valuation, which is where the rubber hits the road, right? So I think the higher concentration of smaller funds, the propagation of private wealth funds and families that with next gen leadership that are interested in throwing themselves into some of these conversations is also notably very exciting. I think that the pipelines as well, to a great extent, certainly in the Indian context, have matured a great deal, and the ecosystem that underpins those pipelines, the sheer professionalism, the savvy that is brought in by all the various incubation programs, the competitions in the university centers and labs that we see. I mean, the level, quality, and sophistication of the opportunity set is very, very different. The ability, I mean, the materials you see and the way that they're framed and the way that, what you're given to digest night and day, right? Compared in general to what we were seeing before. And accordingly, this could also be a little bit of subjective, a little bit of subjective blur because we don't always see what we're not seeing. But we, I mean, we see companies whose general early, first ticket sizes are much larger than they used to be as well, for better or worse. That doesn't, I think, mean that there are no fewer early seed stage businesses, very, very small ticket out there. It's just that maybe it's a function of how we've been positioned or evolved in this ecosystem, or how we're perceived. Again, we're one little tiny player. The key, I think, the trend, and now I don't know how this is going to actually yield outputs and outcomes, but many groups are coming together thinking about, are we part of a status quo, or are we transforming a system? How are we transforming systems? What does that mean? So there's a lot of that kind of overt questioning, lots of gatherings. This is coming up as a panel topic at every gathering, every conference. I think that's quite interesting.
What is your dream? Like if everything came to fruition, this vision that you have, what do you hope the industry will move towards in the next coming years? Or what do you hope that this will achieve?
Thank you for asking that because I actually have a very clear vision of what I want to see, having been in this for a while. From my perspective, as more of a technologist type of person, my background was in tech and development. I want there to be underpinning systems that capture the pipeline residing at all the most fringe nodes of the networks so that we can have a unified architecture that drives private placement of capital and resolves the liquidity challenge for social entrepreneurs. The only way that can happen at scale is using technological intermediation. We must, and this is nothing new, and this is what Bloomberg terminals do for the public markets, right? Generally, and for the traditional financial sector. We must move the needle and up the game in this world of like impact and mission and philanthropy, all the kind of big, fluffy, blurry things that, bodies of thought and knowledge and practice that tend to intersect. We have to up the game and sort this out in terms of the information infrastructure. So for me, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of systems that are built on a as much of an open code stack as we can have. I'm not saying open domain, but common architecture so that the flow of this information that is critical and life-changing when it actually translates to the realm of reality in people's lives and jobs and families and households. We must capture this data and have it made interoperable across systems so that the financing can find it easier and just be more effective.
Thank you so much for sharing. Is there any final words you want to share for how people should get involved in this movement or get involved in the platform?
Our platform is a tech tool for networks or for incubators or for, for those communities of practice that are place-based or issue-based. So that may or may not be everybody's cup of tea. But what is everybody's cup of tea is our network that we've been running on alongside it called impactforbreakfast.com. Impactforbreakfast.com is a monthly gathering. It's been free for 17 years. We've been doing it monthly, and now it's in over 40 cities. We have about maybe 4,800 people. And it's literally a place where you can go and have your cup of tea, maybe once a month, maybe once a quarter. It depends on what goes on. In Geneva, Zurich, and London, we do it more often. And you talk to your other peer impact investors, people, or even if you don't call yourself an impact investor and you're curious, join. It doesn't cost anything. And it's a place and space where you can identify those who are driven by mission and where we share knowledge. It could be about cases and, successes and failures and new methodologies or, new ideas or models. If you have ideas for Impact for Breakfast, then, bring them to us because that's what we're looking for.
Thank you so much.